Assuming that all of your animation is completely done, then we should be ready to export and put this into Unity. So here are all of the different various cycles. Got an idle, walk, run, up, mid, and down jump, and an action. And for the action, I chose this button pressing action. There we go. So everything's all set. We've got all our animation on our controllers. You can see it down here on the timeline. And I've got the timeline set to the maximum frame range that I'm going to need. The first thing that we're going to need to do is save this file as a different version, because what we're essentially going to do is ruin the fact that our reference rig is able to be edited at this point. So we're going to file save as, and I usually just put this on the desktop and name it something obvious like export. I think I've already got it out there though, because I'm going to go guy export. There we go. Okay. Then I'm going to go to File, Reference Editor, and let's import this reference. You do want to make sure one last time that your namespace is something short so that you aren't getting huge long names, because it will by default take your file name, and that can be really annoying when you bring it into Unity. So I've just put the word guy here, which is fine. Then I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to File, Import Objects from Reference. And sometimes it warns you, sometimes it doesn't, but this is not something you can undo. Once you do it, it is permanent. So be sure that you have saved a different version in case something with your rigging goes wrong at the last minute and you've got to change that. So here we are in our file with our imported reference. And there are three different options for getting this file into Unity. Option one is to just save this and do nothing. That sometimes works. The benefit of that is that you sort of have a source file that you can still go back to and edit fully. The downside of that is that it requires that you have a machine that has both Maya and Unity on it at the same time. And if you're working with partners, particularly programmers who may not have the same art tools that you do, this can be the worst option, because they may not be able to import the same objects the same way as you. So let's explore some of the other options. The best one I've found is to export an FBX, but right now we've got a bunch of junk in our file, and it would be great to get some of that junk out of there. So we could just file export FBX, and usually that works completely fine, because what it will do is preserve your skeleton, it will preserve your meshes, and then all of the other stuff in here that is functional inside of Maya will essentially be treated as empty groups. That won't break the function of your rig. It won't make it so that your file is not able to be used, but it is a little unpleasant to deal with. So that's option number two. Option number three is what I'm going to show you now, which is to bake the animation. Okay. So first, let's untemplate our bones layer and show our bones. And I'm also going to, where are my bones? Oh, they're inside. I can't see them. Or, oh, no, I just didn't hit the right one. There we go. So I'm going to untemplate my bones so that I can select them. And come up to Animation, Key, and we're going to want Bake Simulation. So let me go ahead and open the option box and show you what this is. So Bake Simulation is going to set a keyframe on the timeline for every single frame that's happening. And we're doing it on the skeleton itself, because that's all we really need for the game engine. We need the skeleton moving, and we need the mesh to be deforming based on the skeleton. That enables us to delete everything else. So everything in the Do Not Touch folder, IK handles, locators, and every control, all of that can be deleted, and we'll just be left with a bone system and a deforming geometry. Interestingly, you do still have the option to fix the paint weighting even after you've done this, but it is meant to be a sort of no undos, no take back sort of thing, which is why we've saved it to a different file. So let's take a look. Bake to base animation. You can make animation layers in Maya. Don't do that. Time range. Time slider right now is perfect for me because I've set it from 1 to 200, which is exactly how long my animation is. But if yours is different, then you might want to set it to start end and specify. Okay. What are we doing? The selected hierarchy or below this hierarchy. So if you have this set to selected, then what you should really do is hit Shift and expand your skeleton and select all the joints if you want to be very careful. There are also lots of orient constraints in here. As you can see, we're going to be able to delete those as well. And so if you want to select just your skeleton, go up to Show, Objects, Joints, and now we're going to select from the first bone all the way down to the last bone, and we can be sure that we've only got skeleton selected here. Okay. Sample by 1, so that means that every frame we're going to sample. Smart Bake, I'm never entirely sure what that is. I've seen the tooltip before, but I don't quite get the difference. I think it tries to avoid making a keyframe for every single frame, but we'll just leave that off. Keep unbaked keys, I'm not sure. I just leave the rest of these at default. And I'm going to hit Apply. And you're going to see it's going to run through the animation. And now we've got keyframes wall to wall from start to finish. Okay. So if I select any joint, it's got wall to wall keyframes. Okay. Now the animation should still play exactly the way that you designed it. Okay. This also sidesteps the problem of curves in your animation graph editor not being compatible with Unity. That's an error that you get sometimes, so this completely sidesteps that problem. But if you've never encountered that, then you don't need to worry about it. So now what we can do, I'm going to go back up to Outliner and Show All. We can delete everything that is not a part of just the skeleton or the geometry. So all of these controls, I'm just going to select and delete. Everything in this Do Not Touch folder, I'm going to delete. And then we could even come in here and just make sure that all of the constraints are gone. Since the objects constraining are gone, these should be gone as well. And that there was nothing in the geometry group that wasn't supposed to be there. And so now no controls. It still plays exactly the way as it did before. Okay, there we go. So we're all set. So we could save this file as a Maya file and import that, but for the same reasons as I was just going over, it's best to export an FBX. An FBX is a fairly universal file that game engines and other 3D packages can read, and so it opens you up to be able to do editing in those other 3D packages, or to just be able to use this in a game engine without error and without the need for Maya to be installed. So we're going to do Export All. No need to open the option box because those options exist over here on the right-hand side of this save dialog. I'm just going to make sure I'm saving to the desktop. You can see I've already got an FBX out there, but I'm going to do Guy Export Bake like that. And we're going to look at the options. So each one of these sections, there are a few sections here, including geometry, that sort of stuff. And we're going to want to look through those to make sure that we've got the correct options. So inside of geometry, there's very little that you normally have to worry about, except for smooth mesh is typically something that you want to do. Smoothing groups sometimes is another thing. Sometimes programs use smoothing groups to determine what is a hard edge and what is a soft edge. Animation, absolutely, we want to include. So that is its own section. Be sure that that is clicked on. There's a bake animation option in the FBX itself. We just did that. I'm just going to leave it on anyway, and I'm going to set the frame range down to the correct one, which is 200. Whoop, 200. I believe that this tries to do the same job that we just did manually. I haven't tested it in a while, but my recollection was that it was a little bit different. The curve filtering took effect and changed the animation just a little bit, and so I like to do it manually. But this can be a good step as well, and no harm in just leaving it selected. Deformation, go ahead and just leave these on, but if you had blend shapes, skins we definitely want to include because that's what our mesh is, and deformed models, we want to leave this selected just in case we have any of that stuff. The rest of it doesn't really matter. There's a curve filters option here and a keyframe reducer. Let's see, constraints, probably not wanting to include those. Skeletal definitions would be good if we had defined a character, but I don't believe that we have, and you don't need this for it to work properly. Cameras, leave cameras off. You don't need to import those. It's better if you don't. Lights, leave those off. They're incompatible. Also, audio, leave that off. This is the only other one that you should really consider. If you have textured your character or your objects and made materials for them, you should click this embedded media option because it will send the textures right along with your FBX file. If you have not done that, then leaving this selected is no harm done. So I just leave it selected all the time. Okay. And then the last thing that you could look at is advanced options and units and axis conversion. If you know for a fact that your editor does not have the same up axis as Unity, it's Y in Unity, then you could change this. And if you know that it doesn't have the same scale as Unity, you could change this. But typically, I'll just leave it at automatic and leave the axis conversion alone, and everything seems to turn out fine. Okay, so there we go. We're all set. We've got our name. I'm going to click Export All. It takes just a minute, and then we've got that saved onto our desktop so that we can import it into Unity. That should be everything that you need to do. You can save this file or not. You have your previous working file, which should be compatible. And then we're going to head over into Unity to see the process of setting up the file upon import, and then setting up our animation clips and implementing them with our controller. All right, I'm just going to show you the anticipated final outcome first, and then we'll go through all the steps of importing and implementing our animated rig. So here we are. It's a little bit slidey and funny just because I threw it together, but here's the character. When they stand still, we can see the idle cycle. When we walk, then we can see it blend through walk and then run. And when we jump, we have our up, down, and mid-air jump poses blending between each other. I've also got it set up so that if I hold my left mouse button, then I freeze in the middle of the pointing clip. And remember, I didn't provide a cycle for this. This is just an individual pose. And if I let go of the mouse, then it goes back again. We can also set this up so that it is a single one-time play action. And I may demonstrate how to do both of those things, but I just thought it would be interesting to reinterpret the animation a little bit differently. You can also see while I'm holding this button that he will still walk, and he will still jump, and still run, and all of that good stuff, because we have a character mask applied. Okay, so that's what we're looking for as our final result, and let's go ahead and do our import. All right, we're back to our default scene, which just has a capsule for our player. And we're going to go through how to replace this, the replace me object, which is where your animated figure will go. But first we have to get our file into Unity. So I'm providing a package to you that has all of these folders and this scene available. So once you have made a new Unity scene, you need to make sure that you're on 2020.3.7 F1. By the way, that's the version that I'm using. Something very near to that is probably acceptable. If it's 2020.3, you're usually going to be good. But if you're 2021 or later than that, then I would recommend getting this correct version and opening up the scene here. Then we're going to be able to drag our FBX into our project folders. So I've got it on the desktop here, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag it in. And it shouldn't take too long, and we can see it here. I like to make an import folder where I put the imported file. So I'm going to drag that in there just to keep everything nice and neat. And when we select that in our inspector, we'll be able to take a look at some of the different attributes. There's a little preview down here, which will look a little bit odd until you rotate your view. But just to verify that your animation has made it into this FBX, hit play here, and you should see all of your clips cycling through one by one. And that's a great start. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do upon import. So we've got our model tab, which is the first one to appear. If your figure ends up being far too big or small, there's a scale factor in the importer, which is a good one to use to adjust rather than just scaling the game object. We've got this conversion units thing. Sometimes that's the problem. It either needs to be unchecked or rechecked. And there's a bunch of other options here, which mostly you shouldn't be messing around with right now. Okay. We do also have generating light maps and UVs, and that's very important if you're going to do look development and baking of your lights in your scene, but that's not a part of this. The rigging section, animation type generic, is a nice safe one to use. Legacy is if you've got something really strange. None is only if you intend to have no animation whatsoever. And humanoid is a very powerful one. You can use humanoid with avatar definitions. In this case, I'm just going to stick with generic, but that's a good one to look into for future projects. Avatar definition, by the way, is something that we would like to have. And if we can do creation from this model right now, then it can save us a lot of time. Just go ahead and select the root node, guy root here. So you can see guy geometry, that would be the group that we had. And then the geometries hierarchy, guy root and its hierarchy. This is the one, this is the root bone. And so then skin weights, standard 4 bones is fine. And we'll hit apply. All that did is if I open up this, you can see that there is a character avatar right here, which we're going to use in just a little while to make our mask. So you can actually make one of these after the fact, but it's nice to have it right here in the import settings. Animation, we want to make sure, yeah, all these defaults are just fine. But right down here in the clips section, this is where we're actually going to start doing some of our work. We're going to define how long each of the clips are and what their names are. If you have your list from earlier, then that can be helpful to name and quickly find the frame ranges for all of these clips. So we're going to start with idle. I'm going to rename take 1 to idle. And I'm going to come down to the frame range. We've got start and end here. If you don't know what the frame range was, you can hit play and pause, and you've got this scrubbing playhead where you can find the frame range. Just go ahead and change your camera so that you can see the guy doing his animation cycle. So we could find out, okay, when does it switch? Right there, it seems to switch. And then we could read out, where's the frame number? There it is, frame 60, which is about correct. Our idle was from 1 to 60. So, or from, yeah, it was from 1 to 60 exactly, not 61. So I'm going to enter that in and then hit play. And we shouldn't see it swap. There's a little flicker there at the end, but we can usually get rid of that by doing loop time and loop pose. Loop time is essential for any of your animation clips that you want to play continuously. If you don't select this, then it will play through once and then freeze at the final frame. Loop pose is if you've got a little bit of inconsistency in the looping, like that flicker that we saw. You can click that and it usually softens that. So here we go. We've got a base. It is still jittering a little bit. I think that's because I was carelessly animating this, but it's basically fine. Now, this is a very critical step, so make sure that you pay attention to this. Scroll down after you've set all of those different settings and hit apply. If you don't do this, you do not save your clips. Okay, I hit apply, and then down here you can see we've got an idle cycle. Now, we can do several of these before hitting apply. The key is to not deselect this and go somewhere else until you hit apply. That would make you have to do all of this work over again. Okay, so make sure that you hit apply after you change your clips, because then it will not be saved if you don't do that. Okay, so let's go back up and let's add some more clips. If you hit the plus button here, you get another take. It always defaults to the first and last frame of the entire animation range. And we're going to name this walk. We're going to set the range. I started mine on frame 61, and then I ended it. If I take a look at my note, it was 30 frames later, so 90. Okay. Then we can say loop time, loop pose, and hit play. And we just want to check, is it doing the right thing? Yeah. Okay. So we're good there. Now we could hit apply, or we could add a new clip and hit apply after that. So I'm going to do 2 just to show you that you can. Run is going to start on the very next frame, so 91. And then it was also a 30 frame playback range, so we end on 120. We want to check. By the way, your run might seem like it's in slow motion. We can actually speed up the playback inside of Unity, but when I think about it, a run should have probably been a little bit quicker, but having the exact same frame range of 30 frames helps it to blend when we're using the blend tree. And so I prefer to do a slow motion kind of run like this, and then just speed up the playback. Okay, so there we go. We've got run in its proper frame range. So now let's come down and hit apply. Once I do this, you can see they appear right here in the import of the project window, idle, run, and walk. So let's go ahead and keep adding our different cycles. So we've got jump up for our next one. jump up. This is going to be on 121. And it was only 10 frames long, so 130. Just like that. This time, we don't have to loop time if we don't want to. And I can see that it's jittering a little bit. And so in order to get rid of that jitter, you can see there's sometimes this little transition into or out of right over here. So we could set a narrower frame range right in the middle. Let's go for 125 to 126. It's just 2 frames. There we go. It's absolutely still. And since I haven't selected loop time, it'll really just play these 2 frames once and then stay on 126 for the duration, which I think is going to be fine here. Okay, let's go ahead and add jump mid. And that one is going to occur on 20, what is this? 131 is the first start. So we'll just initially go 135 to 136, just to assume that we need to be in the middle of the frame range again. And go ahead and play it. Nice and still. And we'll hit apply. Let's add jump down. Now this is the one that should have a cycle on it. Starting at 141. I don't think I actually animated a cycle on mine, but you should have animated a cycle on yours. 141 to 170. This one would have to loop and loop pose. And so, yeah, again, I've got a little flicker on mine, but yours should actually be animating in its entirety. Okay, let's apply that. And then for our last one, we've got our upper body action. So I'm going to hit plus one more time. I'll just name this action. And it's going to start at 171 all the way to 200. And this one is a loop. Okay, there we go. So now, depending on the action that you picked, let me go ahead and apply that. Depending on the action that you picked, you might want to do this in the way that I had, where if you hold the button, it transitions in and stops. And then when you let go of the button, it transitions out. Or you might want it to just play the entire action through like this. Okay. Depending on which one you want, you can define your clips differently. This one is for the action, which is a single shot. So I'm going to call this action single. But you can define multiple clips over the same frame ranges. So I'm going to hit plus again. And keep in mind, you don't have to do this if you're not going to use the button click and hold method. I'm going to name this one action in. And this one is just going to be the transition to that pose. So 171 to, I don't actually remember. Let me just guess that it's 185 and I'll see how far it gets. Okay, so we're going to drag this up. It looks like it didn't quite make it. So let me do 190. Yeah, there we go. So 190 seems to be the place where we've arrived at this position. So that's good. I'm not going to loop this. I'm going to just hit apply. And then I'm going to define another called action hold. And this will just be 190. And I'll go ahead and make it 191. Unity doesn't like it if you define a 0 frame range clip. So 190 to 191 is just 1 frame. Hopefully we don't see a jitter. Let's see if we do. If we do, then I'll set it to looping. Yeah, so there's a little jitter here. So I'll set it to loop time and loop pose. And now it's gone. So we'll hit apply. Okay, so that'll be our held position. And now the last one, action out. And this will be 191 to 200, and no need for looping on this one. So that'll be from here down. Okay, so now we've got all of our clips that we're going to need, and even some that maybe we won't need if you're doing the single button click action then we've got that here. And if we're doing the held, then we'll use these three. But these will all be on an override layer, excuse me. And we won't need that until we've hooked up the basic functionality for our rig. So we should be all set with the expector there. Make sure you hit apply before you navigate away from that. We can close this or leave it open, but just know that this is the thing that you need to drag, not anything in here. We will use the animation clips in there in a moment, but this is the thing that you need to drag into your scene. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and use, well, first let's drag this in. Just make sure that it pops up in the correct place and that it is the correct size. Being a little bit bigger than the capsule collider is perfect. If you wanted to scale this, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it. So make sure it's positioned right at 0, 0. I dragged it into the hierarchy to ensure that. If yours pops up somewhere else, then just zero out these values to make sure that it is right where it needs to be. All right, so our player controller here is going to need to have its internals replaced. I'm actually going to delete this out of the scene because we've got to put this inside the prefab. If you're not familiar with prefabs yet in Unity, there are two ways to edit the contents, and it is not just to open this up and drop things directly in. Okay, one is to click this little arrow to the right. Now we are inside the prefab. You can see everything else turns gray, and we can edit the internals of the prefab. The other way is to go where it's located in the project view, prefabs, player controller. And if I double click this, we're in that same sort of space where we're inside the prefab editing it and not doing things in the scene itself. The reason that we don't do that is because a prefab is sort of like a cookie cutter, a template. And if I just go inside here in the scene and edit it, it is a modification of that template, not changing the template itself. So we actually want to change the template itself. So I'm going to click this little arrow because it's my preferred method. There we go. And you can see what we've got labeled in here is a replace me object and a sphere, which just represents the nose. And then the top is the player controller, which has the rigid body, the player controller script, and the capsule collider. Okay, so don't touch this player controller object. That's the one that we want to leave completely alone. This replace me object has a few things on it of note. It has an anim values script, which you do have to apply to your character. And it's got this animator component, which is something that we're going to want to apply to your character as well. Okay, so I'm going to just turn this off by clicking the check mark up here at the top. And I'm going to go back to import and drag my character right onto player controller so it becomes a sibling. So now it is underneath that hierarchy. Okay. Our character that we've animated has an animator component. It does not have a controller, but it does have an avatar definition. So that's all completely fine. All right. We're going to need to make an animator controller, but let's just take one last look at the replace me. The anim values script is something that we need to add to our own character. And so with it selected, go to the scripts folder, find the anim values script and drag it into the inspector. That's all we need to do. What this script does is it feeds values from the rigid body into the animation controller so that it can update properly and we can animate everything properly. Okay, so that should be all set. Now, right now, our animation is not going to play because we need a controller. And I already have a controller in the scene, but it will be removed by the time that you guys get the package file. And so I want to really quickly highlight that here it is. It's in the project folder itself. It's an object created down here. And it has certain values that you need to reproduce. Okay. This is kind of how it's set up. We're going to do, or sorry, we're on the wrong layer. This is kind of how it's set up to start off with both of these being blend trees, sort of like we had before, and I kind of did a tour, but now we're going to construct it. And these parameters are important. So if you need to pause the video and read out all of those parameters, write them down exactly as they appear. Capitalization and spacing is important. And I'll tell you what each one of them is, because when you create a parameter, it asks you for a type. So right up here in this plus mark, it asks for float, int, bool, and trigger. So what we've got is two floats to start off with, My with capital S speed, no spaces, is a float. Vert speed is one word, capital S, no spaces. That's also a float. On ground, so lowercase except for the G, is a bool. Okay. Do action, lowercase capital A. This is the one that you should use if you want your animation to just play one time. Just you click the button, it plays straight through, it doesn't pause. And this is a trigger. Okay. I would suggest that everyone just create both of these so that you don't get any compiler errors. So that one is a trigger. And then finally, action hold, all lowercase except for the H, no spaces, is a bool as well. Okay, so this one essentially checks, are you holding down the button? This one checks, did you ever click the button once? Okay, and this one checks, are you in contact with the ground? So we can enable jumping. So all of those parameters are necessary. And so when we create our character controller, you're going to need to put all of those in. All right, let's go ahead and then create our animation controller so that we can put it into our animator component and open up this window to do our editing. So you're going to want to right-click down in the project view, create, and come all the way down to Animator Controller. Okay. Notice that there's a few similarly named terms here. Animator Controller is the one that we want. Okay. And you can name it, do your last name controller. That way they won't conflict with other people's. Sometimes I will make a animations folder for all of this stuff. You could stick it in import. So go ahead and just drag it right in the import folder. So we've got our character import and our animation controller right here. Click on your character underneath the player controller in the scene so that it exposes the animator component in the inspector, and then drag this into that field. Alternatively, you can click the little target and browse for it. I just happen to have a second one, but you should only have one, and you can select it that way. Okay. Once you've got that in place, you should be able to go to Window, Animation, and we're looking for Animator. You can see Animation is here also, as well as Parameters. Animation is down here. This is where we edit and author animations, or where you could edit your own animation. But in this case, we're completely sidestepping this and not using it at all in this project. We've done all of our work in Maya. Okay. The other one, Animator, should open up, and it should have the animator parameters as a part of it if it doesn't open that as well. And hopefully it can be docked if it's floating. I'm not sure if it's even possible. Well, they had it listed as two separate things, so I assume that you could separate them, but right now they're all completely combined, and that's good. Let's go ahead and put in all of our different variables. So I'm going to add a float, my speed, written exactly like that. I'm going to put in another float, vert speed. I'm going to put in a bool, on ground, a trigger, which is do action, and a bool action. Okay. Once you've got all of those parameters, then we're ready to start creating our logic. In the layers tab, by the way, you only have one layer to begin with, this base layer. We're going to create a second one when we do the action, but for now, just be aware that we have that. So hop back to parameters. So to create new nodes in this view, we can right click to create a state, or from an empty or a blend tree, create a substate machine, copy a current state, all of that good stuff. We can also, if we open up our character import in the project view, drag any of these actions directly into this window to create a node. But since we are going to make blend trees, we're going to use the right click method. So I'm going to right click and hold, or actually you don't have to hold, just right click, create state from new blend tree. And then when you click on it, you can name it right up here. And I'm going to name this the move tree. I'm going to create a second one right here. Create state from new blend tree, select it, and I'm going to name this jump tree. Okay. Inside each of these, we will have the logic for blending between those clips. And just because we're going to need to, I'm going to right click and make a transition to this tree, and right click again and make a transition from this tree. So we're going to need to be able to transition into and out of this tree. And the way that we're going to transition, if you click on the arrow, is through the on ground variable. So click the incoming arrow from move to jump. And then over here in the inspector, we can turn off exit time, because no matter what's happening, if you're now on the ground, we want it to stop. And then we're going to add the condition on ground. True. So, sorry, this should be false. If we're moving around on the ground and we jump, we're no longer on the ground. On ground is false. We should be in the jump tree. Okay. Then the opposite one, no exit time, add a condition, same variable, on ground, true. We are now touching the ground. We come back into this move tree. Okay. So that's all we should be able to hook up outside here. Now, double click on the move tree, and this gives us our blend tree node, which we can select. Over here, we have to define what parameter are we blending and where are the clips. Just to point out, we're going to use the default of one-dimensional or 1D blend type, but just click this drop down. You can see there's lots of different kinds of dimensions that we can blend. 2D simple directional, 2D freeform Cartesian, directional. You don't have to know what those are, but you should really explore them at some point. They're a way to blend on multiple parameters rather than just one, such as moving to the side and forward or backward at the same time. So we're going to leave it on one dimensional. And we're going to add 3 motion fields. 1, 2, 3. Because we have our idle, our walk, and our run. Now, as a note, you could make backwards motion as well. We can even set the time frame to play in reverse, and I'll show you that, but 3 is all we need for this. In fact, my character controller as written doesn't even register backwards motion. It registers velocity, so it wouldn't work, but I'll demonstrate it and undo it in just a little bit. All right, so for these motion fields, we're going to unclick Automate Thresholds because we need to set that manually. And we're going to browse with each one of these for our 3 clips. So go ahead and click the little target and select, okay, so I've got everything named exactly the same. So instead I'm going to drag it, but you should just be able to select idle, walk, and run. So I'm going to drag them right from down here. Idle, walk, where is it? There it is. And run. There we go. So once you have those 3, we need to set the threshold for when they should play. Idle should be a threshold of 0. We're still. Walk should be a low number, and run should be a high number. Now, it can be difficult to determine what these thresholds should be. The way that we can figure it out is by observing our character in the scene moving around to see what those speeds are. So I'm going to show you how to do that just because it's a useful thing to know. I'm going to come back out of my player controller. I'm in the scene. I'm going to hit play, okay, so that I can control and walk them around and stuff like that. But you can see the animations are not playing correctly at all. I'm just snapping to this run state over and over again. What I have to do is in the scene view, select my player controller, click the drop-down arrow, and select my Guy Export Bake. That means that on this visible animator window, I'll be able to see these numbers change as I control my character. So it is over on my other monitor, so you guys can't see it, but I'm going to, with this still running, go back into the game view and run him around like this and just see what are the numbers getting up to when I'm doing that. So it seems like when I move, they're getting up to about a maximum of 8. A little higher, really, but they're getting to 8 after a small amount of time. And when I start moving, oh, I think I'm stuck. Did I hit this wall? There we go. When I start moving initially, they go up to about 2 or 3 pretty quickly. But I set my character to rotate, unfortunately. But that gives me my answer. So if you're able to select this and play at the same time, then your window reports back what is happening. Let's go back inside the player controller. Just make sure that's still selected. And so in this blend tree, we're going to set the threshold for run at about 8. We're going to set the threshold for walk at 3 or 4. Let's do 4 since it's right in the middle. Okay. Now you can preview this down at the bottom by hitting this little playback button and then clicking and dragging. No, not that. Clicking and dragging. Where is the value feature? Oh, I guess. Where did it go? That's weird. I know that there's a way to change that value, but I'm looking for it and not finding it. I think maybe I've got this field selected. Let's see. Where's the value? Wow, this is weird. I just did this yesterday and now I'm unable to find it. But I know we can change the, oh, it's right here. It's this slider. It wasn't visible for some reason. That was bizarre. All right, so we hit play and we can blend this by clicking and dragging this slider to see how he's going to transition from clip to clip. So if we're moving a very small amount, a little bit more, now we're up to full walk, and now we're between walk and run, and then all the way up to run. So that's cool. I'm going to hit pause. I mentioned that we could do backwards motion as well. I'm going to show that even though you shouldn't do this, but I'm going to just add 2 more. I'll just add 1 motion field since it's just a demonstration. I'm going to drag walk into it. And this threshold, it tries to give you a reasonable threshold. So it gave me 12. I'm actually going to set it to -4. And then I'm going to set the playback speed. So this is the animation playback speed. I'm going to set that to -1. Okay, so here's what will happen. When I drag this down to 0, right, we're still holding still. But if I drag it backwards, there you go. You can see he's taking backward steps, which is pretty cool. Now, the animation isn't going to look particularly correct because all of our overlap and whatever is going to be playing backwards, but it can be a nice quick fix for something. Forward, backward. Okay. So again, we don't need this backwards motion, so I'm going to select that field by clicking right over here to the left of the clip and then hitting the minus key. So we've only got still, forward, and fast forward. One thing I do want to make note of, if I hit play again, blend this, my running, I feel, is a little bit slow. So I'm going to change the playback speed to 1.5. Or how about 2? So now you can see it's playing very quickly. Let's do 1.5. So now he's just picked up the pace a little bit compared to how I animated it. Okay. And you can do adjustments of that kind for any of your other animations if you really wanted to. Great. So now we've got our blend tree for walking. If we double click out in the empty space, we come back to our base layer. You can also, by the way, click right here on base layer. We're in a move tree, and here's our base layer. Let's double click on jump tree and set that up as well. Same kind of idea, only we need to use a different parameter. We're going to change this one to vert speed. Add 3 motion fields. Turn off the threshold automation, and then drag in or select your 3 clips. So we've got jump up, jump mid, and jump down. So for these, mid should be 0. Jump up should be I think it's a positive number. I kind of forget sometimes, but a positive number like 5, let's just guess. And then jump down should be a negative number like -5. That way, if we're going up in the Y direction, we've got the jump up, down in the Y direction. And if we're just hanging out in midair, remember, we're not grounded, so we're floating in midair, it would be this one. There's not really a need to hit play to test this one, except for your cycle heading downward. But we can drag the threshold. See, this is the thing I was looking for, the little red threshold. But we can drag the threshold here. So here we're falling, here we're rising, and you can just see it blend. Okay. All right. With that, we should be able to test the base functionality of our character. So let's come back over here, exit our player prefab by hitting this little arrow. Okay. And then if you want to, hit File, Save to save the scene, and hit play. You control the character using WASD, W and D rotate, or sorry, A and D rotate, W moves forward, S moves backwards, but there's no animation for that, and there's no tracking for that. So you should be able to start walking and see your character begin to walk. Now there's a problem. Look at that. What's going on here? Once I get up into full running, my character is sliding around like Gumby. So there's a problem. Let's try jumping just before I exit this. Okay. If you got the thresholds backwards, then you'll see the wrong animation play. But we've got a jump up and a fall down. And it seems to be working pretty nicely. All right. So what's going on with our run cycle? I'm going to hit play again. So we need to go back to our import down here in the project folder, over to our animation panel, and then take a look at our run cycle. So if we scroll down in this window, once we select that, look at this. I neglected to click loop time and loop pose. And I hit apply. So now that cycle is cycling, and it wasn't before. We shouldn't have to change anything else. The name didn't change, the frame range didn't change. It's still being used by our character animation controller. I should be able to just hit play and check that it works now. There we go. Now it is playing. I have to get up to speed and then I fall off the side, unfortunately, but let me start over on one side here. Character is a little slidey. I should have added some friction. There we go. Now he's cycling. Okay. And our jumping still works. Now, all of these animations are full body animations, and we can see sometimes they'll work and won't. If I get like too close to the edge, oh, I can't get acceleration up this ramp. There we go. So if I move a little bit too close, he thinks he's falling, right? This ball will count as ground if you're right in the middle, but if you're on the edge, then it thinks that it's falling in midair. And for some reason, it messes up the collider on my character. My ankles are now through the ground. But that's not your fault. That's just me setting up a, semi-functional character. But now we want to add in our action, which currently we don't have any logic for. Okay. Well, we have all the logic for it. We don't have any function for it. So we're going to have to create another layer for this. So in your animator, select your layers and add, and we're just going to name this action. That'll be our action layer. And we need to click this little gear and set it to be what kind of blending. Override means it's just going to do whatever this layer says and not care about any other layer. Additive means that it will try to play both animations at the same time. So we'll try to walk and point in my case. In this case, that would be a bad idea. It is a cool thing to see, but we're just going to do an override. It means it will ignore any animation on the bones that we specify and just play the action. Okay. And what kind of weight? Set it to a weight of 1 so that it treats this as 100% animating. And we have this option for a mask here. We're going to leave that blank for a second just to hook up everything else. And then finally, we'll do this mask at the end. Okay. Let's go ahead and add our states. So for this one, I'm just going to do a single state, which is the action, but we do need an empty state. Okay. The reason we need an empty state is because this is overriding, we're going to need a state for the default position, which is nothing. Okay. So this one, I'm just going to name empty. And the reason it turned orange is because it's the default state. You can see this entry drew an arrow to it. If you right click a state, set layers default state is available if you have more than one state. Right now, this one is the default state, so we don't need to do it. So just make sure that you have that. Okay. Then you can either drag your action one shot in here or make an empty state and select it. So we're going to do our action, which one was it? Single. There it is. And we need to make a transition into it and a transition back to our empty state. All right, so here's our action, and our transitions are going to be based on the trigger. So here, I'm going to open these settings here. Right now, this has an exit time from empty. We definitely don't want that, so unclick that. There is no animation playing here. We just want it to play. And then we need a condition, so I need to scroll down, add, and select do action. Do action is the trigger. There are no options for this. So do action happens, it transitions into this single action. Okay. Then for our exit, for this one, we do want an exit time, and it's at the end of the animation, so it would be 1. I've found, though, that if you set the exit time to 1, even if you set the transition duration to 0, it tends to malfunction just a little bit. So let's put this at like 0.95 or 0.99 and give it a transition duration of like 0.1, or actually it's got to be smaller than that, 0.05. I've got 2 points, because now these both add up to 1. And so it should transition from the end back into nothing. I'm not sure if the preview is going to look like anything. It looks fine, I suppose. But yeah, I've just found that an exit time of 1 tends to repeat the action a second time, which is kind of unfortunate. It makes it look bad. Okay, so there we go. We should be all set. Empty, no motion, our action that plays at 1 time, a transition in based on the trigger, and a transition out that is exiting near the end of the clip and has a very small duration. So we should be fine. All right, let's go ahead and test it. So back here in the scene, I'm going to go ahead and play. Turn the character around so that you can see them, and then left click. Okay, now it played it twice. Dang. So we're going to have to change that transition a little bit, or the amount of time that things take. Okay, but that's one note, so it is playing twice. By the way, if you have this open, then you can see the clips playing and transitioning as you do this, which is a nice way to help kind of bug check as well. I don't know why, but every time it ends, it goes immediately back up to empty and down again, far too quickly. So who knows? But watch this. If I start moving and I click, all of my other animations cancel. Right? If I'm jumping and pointing, he no longer jumps. And the whole point of this is for it to blend properly. So we've got 2 problems to fix. One, which is just kind of a detail, and the other one, which is really game breaking. Also, I don't know why my character is frequently resetting itself to the wrong position again. I don't know what I set wrong, but it won't be your guys' fault for that. We just want to see how all this functions. All right, so let's exit that so we can come back and fix those problems. In order to get our animation, our base layer animation to play while this action is playing, we need an avatar mask. Okay, and currently we don't have one. So I'm going to come down here into the import window and close that just so that I can create something new. Right click, create. Let's come down to avatar mask. And so you can name this your last name mask just so that it doesn't conflict with anyone else's. And we have a mostly empty inspector. Now, humanoid is what we would use if we had a humanoid avatar definition. We don't currently. You can see it actually includes IKs, which is great. But we're going to use transform because it's a lot simpler and more universal. If you had a creature or a vehicle or something, you could use this. All right, so we're going to use skeleton from, and it says an avatar. Well, we created an avatar definition in our import, and it's right there. Okay, that's our avatar. So this one, that's the mask. It has to be within this little gray speech bubble. Click and drag that into the field and click import skeleton. And then down here, we've got our hierarchy. Now this is the geometry hierarchy, so leave that alone, but open up the root. And we're going to have to define which ones of these do we want it to ignore. Let's expand all, and then I'm going to close the geometry section just so we can see all the bones. So think about this. When our action is playing, which I told you to animate upper body only, what should move and what should not move? Okay, our pelvis is lower body. that should not move. Our hips, knees, ankles, ball of the foot and toe, right? None of that should move. Okay? Should our root move? Well, when our original animation, our root was rotating and moving up and down based on like walking and running. So we kind of need that to move. If you don't, by the way, it's kind of funny. It looks like you're sort of pedaling in midair, floating weightlessly. It's kind of funny to see. And you can sort of choose how much of the spine do you want to be still moving and how much do you want to be controlled by your action. In the case of my action, I didn't use the spine really at all. So I'm going to get rid of the spine, and then I'm also going to let the neck, let's see, there it is. I'm going to let the neck and head, eyes and jaw, all of that stuff continue to move based on the original animation. So this checked stuff is the stuff that will animate. This unchecked stuff is going to be ignored by this avatar mask. Okay, so I've got just the arms and fingers and stuff, and also leave the geometry selected. Okay, so all of that will be the stuff that animates. You don't have to do anything else, just check the correct things. Remember, this is an object down in our project folder. Then, back in our animator, we want to click this gear, and we can either drag this avatar mask in there or select it via the target. Oh, I guess I can't drag. Okay, last name mask. See, I've already got my example one. Okay, so with that selected now, these animations should only play on the specified bones. So let's try that part again, at least. Turn your character around, click the button, and try to walk. And there we go. Uh-oh, what's happening? Look, the root of my body is floating in midair. I think I selected the opposite selection that I wanted for the root. That's funny though. Let's jump and click. Yeah, so that's malfunctioning a little bit. What you have to change in order to alter that is down here, this object, open the transforms. Yeah, I left the root selected. I actually wanted it to not have the root. There we go. Let's test one more time. Okay, so now the walk is controlling the root and the jumps are controlling the root. Okay, so we're all set there. Now let's try to get that double transition handled. So when it transitions into this, then it's fine. When it transitions out of this, it tends to skip this and come right back again instantaneously. That may be because this has no exit time. And if I put in an exit time, it would sort of act as a cooldown for this. So I'm actually going to re-enable exit time. Even though there's nothing happening, it'll wait till 0.75 in this animation clip, 75% of the way through this animation clip, in order to start doing the action at all. I don't really want a duration though, so I'm just going to set to 0.05, a very small one. Let's try that and see if it helps. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it seems to, well, nope, it did it that time. So we can also, if you open up your parameters while this is playing, then when you click, you should see this highlight and de-highlight, and you'll see the action hold highlight and de-highlight when you hold the button. That can be another good way to check. So I'm trying to check if this triggers twice. Oh, okay, I see. If you click a second time before the animation is done, it holds on to that trigger until it resets. So that's the problem. It's just the way that I programmed it. So this isn't actually a glitch here. It's just that the way that my logic works is that the trigger holds until it's called and then it's false again. So don't worry about that. Okay, but the other part, holding down the button, works really nicely. And this plays continuously over and over and over again if I do that. All right, so that's all working, and this is working. I'm going to try to solve this syncing character problem before I hand this off to you guys, because that is annoying. Okay, but just know that that's not your fault. All right, let's do the other method then. So on this layer, on this action layer. We can make this work a different way instead with the holding the button method. We still need our empty state, and you can just leave the action here, but we're going to have to get rid of this transition. Otherwise, it will conflict with the other transition that we're going to make. So just know that if this is the way you want it to work, you're done. But I'm going to demonstrate this second way. So I'm going to select these two transitions, delete them, and just leave that there. And now I want to have, let's move this up a little bit, my three other actions. So my action in, my action hold, and my action out. Okay. We do want the three of these separate like this, because from our empty state, we go into the transition. From the transition, we go to the action. From the action, we go to the outro. And from the outro, we go back to the empty state. So it's a big loop, just like that. Let me pull these apart just a little bit. All right. So the transition for going from nothing to our action is now going to be based on action hold. Okay, we could use the do action trigger as well here, but we're just using action hold. If it's true, we want to go from nothing to the first animation. This transition, though, just needs to trigger when the animation is done. So we don't need any condition at all. We just want to have an exit time of almost 1, right? So I'm going to do 9.5 again, and a transition duration of, I guess we'll just do 0.5 and hope that it works properly. If we end up getting a flicker or something, then I'll set this lower, but it should probably work. Okay. Then our action is going to hold here until we need a condition that action hold is false. Okay. So we don't need an exit time for this one. In fact, this is just a single frame repeating forever anyway. And so we don't need that. And our transition duration, we could set to as close to 0 as we want to. I'll just do 0.1. That'll be fine. Okay. Then for the outro for this one, this is going to complete when its animation is done. We don't need a condition for it either. So we're going to set this to exit time of 0.95 with a transition duration of 0.5. Okay. This duration of transition, by the way, is a blending between whatever the pose is in this animation and whatever the pose is over here. So this is just going to transition it to nothing. So it shouldn't really matter all that much. So we should have all the logic cooked up there. When the Boolean is true, we transition and hold until the Boolean is false, and then we transition back out to this empty state. All right, let's go ahead and see if it works. Okay, so I just clicked there. Slight problem. So it's not doing the trigger if I single click. Maybe that's preferable. It's sometimes doing it at just the right time. So here's the thing. This empty state has a duration. You can control this duration, but it's not triggering unless my button is held right there at the end. So, or right wherever the exit time is. Actually, where is the exit time? So it's not triggering unless it's being held at 0.75. So really I should disable this. You can do this at runtime. I'm not sure if it's going to set it back, but now when I click, it should instantly transition. There we go. So that's probably the preferred method. Now if I hold it, there we go. We can walk, we can jump. If I let go of it, let's let go mid-jump. There we go, it transitions back. Held, unheld, held, unheld, held, unheld. Perfect. Exactly what we wanted. Okay, so those are our two options. Depending on the kind of animation that you did, then you can set up this one or you can set up the opposite one. Now I've shown you how to set up both. Just don't leave both connected. Okay, if you're going to choose the single, delete all of this stuff. If you're going to choose the hold action, at least disconnect this or delete it. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to leave it like that. So there we go. We're all done with our character setup. That should be everything. The last thing for you to do would be to rename this, but I think what I'm going to do is just have you leave it as player controller, and I'm going to delete it out of my scene each time I grab a new one. just so that we absolutely don't get any conflicts. I'll show you how you can rename this, but be cautious. If you're a little bit less confident, then maybe don't do this step, because you could undo all of the good progress that you've made. Any prefab can be unpacked, renamed, and resaved as a prefab. So what I can do is right-click this. I'm in the scene right now. Right-click this, and I can do unpack. So prefab, unpack. Okay. Then I can rename this. I'll do last name player. Then I'm going to drag this back into the prefab folder, and now it is essentially a new prefab with a different name. So we can do that. The only last thing I can see here is that the capsule collider is a little bit too short. It doesn't really matter because we don't have a ceiling for this, but I think it means that you could run under there and cut his head off. That's another thing that we could do if we enter into the prefab. Then we could change the capsule collider height, but we'd also have to set the Y offset so that it still lines up perfectly on the ground, which would be right about there. So that looks about right. We could also change the radius if we wanted to just collide the body and let the arms go through things, or give it a little extra space, whatever. Those would be extra things that you could do, and you could change the jump force and move multiplier if they weren't exactly the way that you'd wanted your body to be. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to re-exit that. With everything all set, then you're ready to export your prefab so that we can test your assignment. I'm going to hit File Save and File Save Project just before I do this. All right. And then down in your prefabs folder, if you're using mine that is not renamed, just click on it to make sure that it looks exactly the way that it should. And then you're going to right click to export package from there. If you've made your own, then you can just right click your own. Okay, so right click, we're going to go to export package. And then here are all the included. Make sure include dependencies is left on. Okay. And in our example folder here, this is the stuff that I had made for my original. So we actually don't need any of that. In import, here is the guy that I just imported, the FBX, the animation controller, and the mask. This physics material is applied to the player, so you need to include that. And then our prefab. Did I click the wrong one? Oh, I did. Let me do the one that I just did it as an example. Export package from this one. There we go. Okay, so this example stuff shouldn't be included still. It won't be in your project, so don't worry about it. Here's the character. Here's the controller. Here's the mask material. Here's the prefab. Huh. It's the wrong one. No, that's the right one. Yeah. And then here are the scripts, the animation, camera following, and player controller script. So you can leave all of that, even though my scene will probably have them, but just include them anyway. Okay. Then we can click export, and you just save this to your own desktop and name it last name, homework, whatever number this is. I don't even remember. Let's just say it's 8, but I don't remember. Be sure to check. Okay. And that's what you're going to turn in for homework this week. Okay. So we have all the animations set up and imported. We've got your homework file included in here, your exported FBX. We've got it all hooked up to the logic, and we can test it by moving and running around. Okay. With that knowledge, you guys should be able to create any sort of creature or character animation rig that you need to create. You should be able to make the animations for them, define all of the cycles, and import them and implement them with a controller in Unity. The only part that you can't do yet is write the logic for the character, but that would be a different kind of tutorial. All right. I hope all of that works for you guys and hope you enjoyed that. And I will talk to you guys next week.